Hi there, I'm your research partner, and I am here to help out two tired Black parents with the reading of Project 2025. We are on Chapter 1, Section 3.3 Making the Appeals Process Work. The non military government dismissal rate is well below 1%, and no private sector industry employee enjoys the job security that a federal employee enjoys. Both safety and justice demand that managers learn to act strategically to hire good and fire poor performers legally. The initial paperwork required to separate poor or abusive performers, in parentheses, when they are infrequently identified, is not overwhelming, and managers might be motivated to act if it were not for the appeals and enforcement processes. Formal appeal in the private sector is mostly a rather simple two-step process, but the government unions and associations have been able to convince politicians to support a multiple and extensive appeals and enforcement process. As noted, there are multiple administration appeals bodies. The FLRA, OSC, and EEOC have relatively narrow jurisdictions. Claims that an employee's removal or disciplinary actions violate the terms of a collective bargaining agreement between an agency and a union are handled by the FLRA. Employees who claim their removal was a result of discrimination can appeal to the EEOC, and employees who believe their firing was retribution for being a whistleblower can go to the OSC. While the MSPB specializes in abuse of direct merit system issues, it can and does hear and review almost any of the matters heard by the other agencies. Cases involving race, gender, religion, age, pregnancy, disability, or national origin can be appealed to the EEOC or the MSPB, and in some cases to both, and to the OSC. This gives employees multiple opportunities to prove their case, and while the EEOC, the MSPB, the FLRA, and the OSC may all apply to essentially the same burden of proof, the odds of success may be substantially different in each forum. In fact, forum shopping among them for a friendlier venue is a common practice, but frequent flyers face no consequences for frivolous complaints. As a result, meritorious cases are frequently delayed, denying relief and justice to truly aggrieved individuals. The MSPB can and does handle all such matters, but it faces a backlog of an estimated 3,000 cases of people who were potentially wrongfully terminated or disciplined as far back as 2013. From 2017 through 2022, the MSPB lacked the quorum required to decide appeals. On the other hand, as of January 2023, the EEOC had a backlog of 42,000 cases. While federal employees win appeals relatively infrequently, the MSPB administrative judges have upheld agency decisions as much as 80% of the time. The real problem is the time and paperwork involved in the elaborate process that managers must undergo during appeals. This keeps even the best managers from bringing in all but the most egregious cases of poor performance or misconduct. As a result, the MSPB, the EEOC, the FLRA, and the OSC likely see very few cases compared to the number of occurrences, and non-performers continue to be paid and often are placed in non-work positions. Having a choice of appeals is especially unique to the government. If lower priority issues were addressed in-house, serious adverse actions would be less subject to delay. With the proper limitation of labor union actions, the FLRA should have limited reason for appeals. The EEOC's federal employees section should be transferred to the MSPB, and many of the OCS's investigatory functions should be returned to the OPM. The MSPB could then become the main reviewer of adverse actions, greatly simplifying the burdensome appeals process. Making civil service benefits economically and administratively rational. In recent years, the combined wages and benefit of the executive branch civilian workforce totaled $300 billion according to official data, but even that amount does not properly account for the billions in unfunded liability for retirement and other government reporting distortions. Official data report employment as approximately 2 million, but this ignores approximately 20 million contractors who, while not eligible for government pay and benefits, do receive them indirectly through contracting, in parentheses, even if they are less generous. Official data also claim that national government employees are paid less than private sector employees are paid for similar work, but similar, more neutral sources demonstrate that the public sector workers make more on average than their private sector counterparts. All of this extravagance deserves close scrutiny. Market-based pay and benefits. According to the current law, federal workers are to be paid wages comparable to equivalent private sector workers rather than compared to all private sector employees. While the official studies claim that federal employees are underpaid relative to the private sector by 20% or more, a 2016 Heritage Foundation study found that federal employees received wages that were 22% higher than wages for similar private sector workers. If the value of employee benefits was included, the total compensation premium for federal workers over their private sector equivalents increased to between 30 and 40%. The American Enterprise Institute found a 14% pay premium and a 61% total compensation premium. Base salary is only one component of a federal employee's total compensation. In addition to high starting wages, federal employees normally receive an annual cost of living adjustment, in parentheses, available to all employees, and generous scheduled raises known as step increases. Moreover, a large proportion of federal employees are stationed in Washington, D.C. area and other large cities and are entitled to steep locality pay enhancement to account for the high cost of living in these areas. A federal employee with 5 years' experience receives 20 vacation days, 13 paid sick days, and all 10 federal holidays compared to an employee at a large private company who receives 13 days of vacation and 8 paid sick days. Federal health benefits are more comparable to those provided by Fortune 500 employers, with the government paying 72% of the weighted average premiums, but this is much higher than for most private plans. Almost half of private firms do not offer any employer contributions at all. The obvious solution to these discrepancies is to move closer to a market model for federal pay and benefits. One need is for a neutral agency to oversee pay, hiring, and decisions, especially for high-demand occupations. The OPM is independent of agency operations, so it can assess requirements more neutrally. For many years, with its special pay rates program, the OPM evaluated claims that the federal rates in an area were too low to attract competent employees and allowed agencies to offer higher pay when needed rather than increased rates for all. Ideally, the OPM should establish an initial pay schedule for every occupation and region, monitor turnover rates and applicant to position ratios, and adjust pay and recruitment on that basis. Most of this requires legislation, but the OPM should be an advocate for true equality of benefits between the public and private sectors. Reforming federal retirement benefits. Career civil servants enjoy retirement benefits that are nearly unheard of in the private sector. Federal employees retire earlier, in parentheses normally at age 55 after 30 years, enjoy richer pension annuities, and receive automatic cost of living adjustments based on the areas in which they retire. Defined benefit federal pensions are fully indexed for inflation, a practice that is extremely rare in the private sector. A federal employee with a pre-retirement income of $25,000 under the older of the two federal retirement plans will receive at least $200,000 more over a 20-year period than will private sector workers with the same pre-retirement salary under historic inflation levels. During the early Reagan years, the OPM reformed many specific provisions of the federal pension program to save billions administratively. Under OPM pressure, Reagan and Congress ultimately ended the old Civil Service Retirement System, CSRS, entirely for new employees, which in parentheses counting disbursements for the unfunded liability, accounted for 51.3% of the federal government's total payroll. The retirement system that replaced it, the Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, reduced the cost of federal employment retirement disbursements to 28.5% of payroll, in parentheses, including contributions to Social Security and the employer match to the Thrift Savings Plan. More of the pension cost was shifted to the employee, but the new system was much more equitable for the 40% who received few or no benefits under the old system. By 1999, more than half of the federal workforce was covered by the new system, and the government's per capita share of the cost, as the employer, in parentheses, was less than half the cost of the old system. 20.2% of the FERS